Chapter 1, The World Before the Opening of the Atlantic. Section 3, Trading Kingdoms of West Africa. For hundreds of years, trade routes have crisscrossed all over West Africa, as you can see from the red lines here. One of the groups who created these trade routes were the Berbers. The Berbers were a group from North Africa, up in this section, who had all these trade routes created throughout West Africa. And one of the items that the Berbers had was salt. And a lot of groups in West Africa needed salt, so they would trade it. Eventually, those routes would be taken over by three West African kingdoms: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. We're going to start with the Kingdom of Ghana. Ghana began around 380 along a river in West Africa called the Niger River. The Niger River starts around this area right here and travels this direction and empties out in the Gulf of Guinea. And Ghana developed into a trading center. Ghana had lots of gold, but they wanted salt. The reason why they wanted salt is because salt is a natural preservative. It helps preserve meat, and meat will not spoil as quickly if it's covered in salt. So Ghana had gold, they wanted salt, so they began to trade with groups from the north like the Berbers, and so this begins the gold for salt trade. The Ghana Empire will fall. Another kingdom will develop in its place, and that kingdom is called Mali. Mali was founded by a guy named Sundiata. Sundiata won back the country's independence and conquered nearby kingdoms like Ghana. That's how he kind of started the Kingdom of Mali. A few years later, we have another king named Mansa Musa, who led the kingdom to its greatest height of wealth, power, and fame by building trade cities in Mali like Timbuktu. Some other key cities, here's Timbuktu by the way, right there. Some other key trading cities is Gao and Jenne, right there. Mansa Musa also encouraged the spread of Islam. Now, Islam actually started in West Africa with the Ghana Empire, but it will continue to thrive in West Africa. Mansa Musa encouraged the spread of Islam by building mosques. Remember, mosques are sort of like a church, but except they just pray in the mosque. Making a Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca, which is the holy city of Islam, and establishing schools to study the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. Mansa Musa was also famous for leading a pilgrimage to Mecca, and along the route he would throw gold at people as they were standing along the side of the road, because people had heard of Mansa Musa, and as Mansa Musa came, he was kind of like a rock star back in those days. He would just throw gold at people, and people were standing on the side collecting all that gold on his way to Mecca. One of the groups that Mansa Musa had conquered when he was king were the Songhai. And as Mali starts to decline in power later on, the Songhai start to gain power, and they will regain their independence and conquer Mali. And that's the third of our three West African kingdoms. Songhai's greatest ruler was a guy named Askia the Great, who was a devout Muslim. He supported learning and education, and he worked to develop a strong government in Songhai. And you can see here's Songhai on the map. You remember, if you see all the maps on all the previous slides, each of those kingdoms kept getting bigger. So Ghana was like right here, then Mali got a little bit bigger, and now Songhai is even larger. After Askia's death, the kingdom declined, and they will be conquered by a group of people from up in the northern region called the Moroccans. And the reason why the Moroccans were so successful in defeating Songhai is because they used a new weapon called the cannon, which the people of Songhai had never seen before. Now you might ask yourself why we're talking about the West African trading kingdoms when we're in a U.S. history class. Well, there is a tie-in, and that tie-in is with slavery. The African slave trade, the West African slave trade, will begin in this time period. Now, slavery had been in these African tribes for centuries, as it has with a lot of ancient cultures. Slavery has always been around. People who were captured by warring groups, criminals, and even relatives of people who owed money were sold into slavery. Now, beginning in the 600s, Arab Muslims as well as Europeans who were coming to Africa became interested in the slave trade. The slave trade became an important part of West African economy. Now, they got valuable goods from the Middle East and Europe for slaves, human beings. For example, they got weapons for people. That's just an example. West Africa was home to many enslaved Africans who were brought to Americas. And eventually down the line, it's going to ruin West Africa because the culture and civilizations in West Africa will decline or disappear for that matter because of the slave trade. That's the end of section 3.